That voice in your head isn't wandering. It's obeying a law. Every quiet sentence you repeat is training your soul to expect loss, and you didn't even notice when despair became familiar. There are mornings when sadness arrives before thought, when the weight is already there and you're left wondering who invited it. You assume it's random, chemical, circumstantial, something that just happened to you. But the soul doesn't speak in chaos. It responds to repetition. Long before the heaviness, a dialogue was rehearsed in secret, looping beneath awareness, shaping expectation like gravity. Ancient words echo through this tension. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Not as comfort, but as confrontation. A higher voice interrupts the spiral, challenging the authority of despair itself. This isn't prayer as poetry. It's command disguised as intimacy. Because if the soul has been listening all along, who has really been speaking to it? And what law have you been living under without consent? There is a quiet lie you were taught to believe, and it was delivered gently enough that you never questioned it. You were told that thoughts are harmless, that inner speech is just background noise, that what you say to yourself doesn't count unless it's spoken aloud. So you learn to treat the voice inside your head like weather. If it rains, you endure it. If it storms, you wait it out. If it darkens your mood, you blame the day, the past, the chemistry, the circumstances, anything but the dialogue itself. And yet, something never added up. You wanted peace, but you rehearsed exhaustion. You wanted hope, but you narrated absence. You wanted relief, but every morning you quietly repeated, "Here we go again," not as drama, not as intention, but as habit. This is where the contradiction begins to ache, because on the surface you are innocent. You are not trying to suffer. You are not consciously choosing despair. You would never stand in front of a mirror and declare, "I choose heaviness. I choose lack. I choose to feel small." And yet, listen closely. You do something subtler. You explain your pain to yourself. You justify your fatigue. You narrate your limitations as facts. You say things like, "That's just how I am. I've always struggled with this. Nothing ever really changes. I don't have the energy. It's too late now." You don't scream them, you whisper them, and because they are whispered, they feel safe, reasonable, even honest. But honesty, when repeated without authority, becomes a script. Here is the hidden problem no one names. You confuse passive repetition with innocence. You believe that because you didn't mean to install despair, you are not responsible for it living inside you. You assume that because the dialogue feels automatic, it must be neutral. You assume that because it arose in response to pain, it is justified. But the subconscious does not care about justification. It only knows repetition. This is the moment most people resist, because if inner dialogue is not harmless commentary, if it is not just steam releasing from pressure, then something uncomfortable follows. It means the very voice you trust to describe your suffering may be the same voice that is sustaining it. And that realization stings. You begin to notice how often you check in with yourself, only to confirm the worst. You wake up and scan your body for heaviness. You enter a room and anticipate rejection. You start a task already narrating failure. You call it realism. But realism, when repeated without interruption, becomes prophecy. This is where frustration turns inward, because you have tried everything except this. You've changed routines, you've changed environments, you've changed people, you've read books, you've prayed prayers, you've waited for motivation to return like a lost visitor, and still somehow the same emotional gravity pulls you back to familiar ground, the same tone, the same internal weather, the same quiet resignation. Not because you love it, but because it's rehearsed. Here is the most unsettling part. The soul learns what to expect by listening to how you speak about your life when you think no one is listening. And you have been speaking long enough that expectation has settled in like furniture. You don't notice it anymore. It's just, there. The exhaustion that arrives before effort, the sadness that shows up before evidence, the resignation that precedes possibility. You wanted relief, but you kept narrating the absence of relief as identity. You wanted change, but you kept explaining to yourself why change was unlikely. Not once, but daily, casually, faithfully. And this is where the collapse begins. Not dramatic, not loud, but slow and internal. Because you start to see that despair did not ambush you. It was introduced, invited through familiarity, given a seat through repetition, allowed to stay because it spoke in your own voice. And now, a deeper question trembles beneath the surface. If the soul has been listening all this time, and if it responds not to desire but to command, then what have you been commanding without realizing it? The answer does not arrive yet. It lingers, uncomfortable, exposing, unfinished. There is a second illusion, deeper than the first, more dangerous, because it disguises itself as self-awareness. You believe that noticing your inner dialogue means you are free from it. You say, I know I'm negative sometimes. You say, I'm aware of my patterns. You say, that's just my inner critic talking. And you think that naming the voice weakens it. But listen carefully. Awareness without interruption is still obedience. You can watch the spiral and still fall down it. You can label the despair and still rehearse it. You can call it a pattern and still repeat it with religious devotion. This is where the collapse sharpens into something painful. Because you begin to see that you have not merely had thoughts, you have been loyal to them. You return to the same inner explanations, like a familiar room. You revisit the same conclusions because they feel known. You rehearse the same emotional outcomes because they feel honest. Honest but devastating. There is a strange comfort in despair when it is predictable. At least it doesn't surprise you. At least it doesn't demand courage. At least it lets you stay small without confrontation. And so the dialogue continues. I'm tired. I don't feel like myself. What's the point? This always happens. Again and again. Not shouted, not dramatized, just repeated. And repetition is where innocence dissolves. Because repetition is not passive. Repetition is training. Every time you narrate your fatigue as identity, the soul learns to expect heaviness. Every time you explain disappointment as destiny, the soul braces for loss. Every time you describe yourself as broken, delayed, behind, lacking, the soul adjusts its posture accordingly. It stops reaching, it stops hoping, it stops leaning forward into possibility, not out of rebellion, out of obedience. This is the betrayal that hurts the most. You have been seeking peace from the very voice that is denying it to you. You ask the same inner narrator to comfort you after it has spent hours describing why comfort is unlikely. You ask the same internal tone to inspire you after it has carefully catalogued all your failures. You are thirsty, and you keep consulting the drought. And then, inevitably, frustration turns into self-attack. What's wrong with me? Why can't I change? Why do I keep ending up here? But even these questions are spoken in the same familiar tone. The tone of resignation. The tone that assumes struggle is permanent and relief is temporary. And now something devastating becomes visible. You are not stuck because you lack insight. You are not stuck because you lack discipline. You are not stuck because you lack desire. You are stuck because your inner dialogue has been left unchallenged for so long that it has mistaken itself for truth. It doesn't argue anymore, it doesn't need to, it simply states. And the soul listens. This is why affirmations sometimes feel hollow. This is why motivation fades. This is why hope rises briefly and then collapses. Because beneath the surface, the older dialogue is still running, unchallenged, uninterrupted, unquestioned. Like a law no one remembers agreeing to. And here, right here, is where the tension peaks. Because if this is true, if inner dialogue is not commentary but command, if repetition is not harmless but formative, then something terrifying follows. Silence itself becomes dangerous. Because when you do not speak with authority, the old voice fills the gap, and it will keep speaking, until something stronger interrupts it. But that interruption has not yet arrived. Not yet. For now, you are left with the unbearable awareness that what you thought was random, what you thought was chemistry, and what you thought was circumstance has been practice, and the soul has learned well. Because the next truth will not comfort you. It will rearrange everything you thought you knew about thought itself. There is a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when the ground beneath your understanding gives way. Not dramatically, not with thunder, but with a soft, terrifying clarity. It begins when you realize that the inner world is not governed by morality. It does not reward good intentions. It does not punish bad ones. It does not ask why you said what you said. It only responds to what is repeated. This is the law you were never taught. The subconscious does not argue with you. It does not debate truth. It does not distinguish between hope spoken in desperation and despair spoken in habit. It accepts instruction, blindly, faithfully, relentlessly, and the instruction is language, not loud language, not dramatic declarations, but the quiet, consistent sentences you murmur to yourself when no one is listening. This is where the betrayal of old beliefs cuts deepest. You are taught that belief comes first and language follows, that you must feel different before you can speak differently, that words are reflections of inner states. But what if it's the reverse? What if language is not the mirror, but the mold? What if the subconscious is not a judge weighing sincerity, but a field responding to frequency? Because repetition is frequency, and frequency is law. This is why the same sentence spoken enough times begins to feel true, even if it wasn't at first. This is why despair, when narrated daily, becomes familiar. Why hope, when neglected, feels foreign. Why new possibilities feel unrealistic, not because they are false, but because they are unrehearsed. The subconscious does not ask, "Is this good for you?" It asks, "Is this consistent?" Consistency is authority in the inner world, and you have been consistent. Consistently explaining why things are hard, consistently narrating why you are tired, consistently confirming why relief is delayed. So the field adjusts. It aligns circumstances, perceptions, emotional responses, not as punishment, not as reward, but as echo. This is the part that makes people uncomfortable, because it means the subconscious is not sabotaging you. It is serving you, serving the instructions it has been given, again and again. This is why intention feels powerless against habit. You intend peace, but you repeat struggle. You desire abundance, but you narrate lack. You hope for light, but you describe shadow, and the field follows the stronger signal. Repetition always outweighs desire. Always. This is the invisible law operating beneath awareness. Language becomes expectation. Expectation becomes posture. Posture becomes experience. Not overnight, not magically, but inevitably. Like gravity. You don't have to believe in gravity for it to pull you downward. You don't have to agree with this law for it to operate. It has been operating anyway. And now here comes the most unsettling revelation of all. The subconscious does not recognize sarcasm. When you say, "Of course this would happen to me," it hears confirmation. When you say, "I'm always exhausted," it hears identity. When you say, "Nothing ever works out," it hears instruction. It does not hear tone, it hears statement. This is why despair feels heavier with time, because it has mass. Built through repetition, sentence by sentence, day by day, year by year, and suddenly something ancient makes terrifying sense. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Not as poetry, not as comfort, but as interruption. As if the speaker understood something you forgot, that the soul is not the speaker, it is the listener, and it has been listening to you. This is where awe mixes with fear, because if this law is real, if language is command and repetition is authority, then silence is not neutral. Silence simply allows the last command to continue echoing. And now you stand at the edge of a realization that cannot be undone. You have been living under a law you did not know you were obeying, and it has been exact, precise, unforgiving. But the mechanism is not fully revealed yet, because there is still one question that tightens the chest. If the subconscious obeys without judgment, and if repetition installs reality, then what happens the moment a different voice speaks? There is a breath you take when you realize the law has no memory of mercy. Not because it is cruel, but because it is precise. The subconscious does not remember your childhood wounds. It does not remember the betrayal that bent your voice inward. It does not remember the moment hope first disappointed you. It remembers only what you say now, and more importantly, what you say again. This is where the mystery deepens, because if repetition is law, then interruption is rebellion. And rebellion inside the mind feels unnatural. Have you noticed that? The moment you try to speak differently, something resists. A tightening in the chest, a quiet embarrassment, a feeling of lying. You say a new sentence and the old voice whispers back, "That's not true." But that whisper is not truth, it is familiarity defending itself. The old dialogue feels true because it has been repeated, not because it is accurate. This is the betrayal that stuns the nervous system. Truth is not what feels honest. Truth is what is authorized, and authorization in the inner world is granted through repetition. This is why despair feels believable. This is why hope feels suspicious. This is why peace feels fragile, not because peace is weak, but because despair has seniority. It has been speaking longer, and the subconscious respects tenure. This is why you can read something uplifting and feel nothing. Why a powerful idea excites you for a moment and then fades. Because inspiration without repetition is noise. The field listens for consistency, not brilliance. It listens for what you return to, again, and again, and again. Now listen carefully, because this is the moment everything pivots. The law does not require belief. You do not need to feel the new sentence. You do not need to believe it yet. You do not need emotional alignment. The subconscious does not wait for sincerity. It waits for authority. And authority is not volume. Authority is persistence. This is why ancient prayer was not polite. It was not explanatory. It was declarative. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Hope in God. Not a request, not a wish. A command. A higher voice addressing a lower field. This is the part that shakes people, because it means you do not heal by agreeing with the soul. You heal by speaking to it. You do not wait for the spiral to end. You interrupt it. You do not ask despair why it is there. You question its right to speak, and the moment that happens, something subtle shifts. The field hesitates, not because it understands, but because a new signal has entered. At first, nothing dramatic happens, no fireworks. No emotional surge, just resistance. The old voice pushes back harder. It reminds you of evidence, it lists reasons, it points to history, because it has been in control for a long time, and control does not release easily. This is where most people stop. They mistake resistance for failure. They say, "See, it doesn't work." But resistance is not failure. Resistance is confirmation. It means the old frequency has been challenged. It means the law has noticed. Because the moment a different sentence is repeated, even without emotion, even without belief, the field begins to recalibrate, slowly, reluctantly, but inevitably, not toward positivity, not toward fantasy, toward the strongest signal. And now, here is the cliff's edge. If the subconscious obeys repetition, and if repetition installs reality, then the most dangerous thing you can do is speak without awareness. Because every sentence trains expectation. Every quiet phrase is a vote. Every inner conclusion is an instruction. And the soul is still listening, still open, still impressionable, which means the question is no longer why you feel the way you do. The question is terrifyingly simple. What are you authorizing next? Silence. Because the law is now visible, and once seen, it cannot be unseen. There is a moment, this moment, when awareness demands a response, not later, not someday, now. Because once the law is seen, neutrality dissolves. You are either repeating the old dialogue, or you are interrupting it. There is no passive ground anymore, and here is the uncomfortable truth most people avoid. Moments like this pass unnoticed unless they are marked. The subconscious does not register insight, it registers signal. It notices what you do when something resonates. This is why rituals exist. This is why declarations matter. This is why moments are sealed with action. Because action tells the field, this matters. So listen carefully, not as instruction, but as invitation. If something in you feels exposed right now, if you recognize the voice we've been naming, if you felt that quiet shock of recognition, the kind that doesn't scream, but lingers, then do not let this moment dissolve back into silence. Mark it, Not for me, for you. When you like this video, you are not clicking approval. You are declaring interruption. You are saying, I noticed the pattern, and I refuse to let it continue unnoticed. When you comment, even a single sentence, especially naming the dialogue you are breaking, you are doing something powerful. You are dragging the unconscious into light. You are turning a whisper into a witness. You are speaking with authority where you used to narrate helplessness. And when you subscribe, understand this. You are not subscribing to content. You are subscribing to frequency. You are choosing to place your attention where it will be challenged, not comforted, not soothed, but confronted. This is not a channel for distraction. This is a space for interruption. And the subconscious notices alignment. It notices repetition. It notices when you return. This is not about community in the shallow sense. This is about recognition, about realizing you are not the only one who has lived under an invisible law without consent, about standing quietly but decisively among others who are done rehearsing despair as identity. So pause for a breath. Feel the tension in your chest. That is not pressure. That is activation. And choose, consciously, to mark this moment. Because if you do nothing, the old dialogue will gladly resume. And it will sound reasonable. It always does. Because the next shift is not about understanding. It is about practice. The shift does not begin with optimism. That is the first surprise. It does not begin with feeling better. It does not begin with believing anything new. It does not begin with relief. It begins with address. Because until now, you have been speaking from the spiral, explaining it, describing it, justifying it. Your inner voice has been a narrator trapped inside the story, reporting on the darkness as if it were weather. But the ancient interruption speaks differently. Why are you cast down, O my soul? Notice the distance in that sentence. Not denial. Not suppression, distance. The speaker is not drowning in the feeling, the speaker is standing over it. This is the method most people miss because it feels too simple to matter and too unfamiliar to feel natural. You stop speaking as the mood, and you begin speaking to it. This is not positive thinking. Positive thinking tries to overwrite emotion. This is authority. Authority does not argue with feeling. It questions its right to dominate. When heaviness arrives, the old pattern was automatic. I'm exhausted. Here it is again. I can't today. These sentences were not observations. They were commands. So the interruption must also be a command, but of a different order, not louder, clearer. You do not say, I shouldn't feel this. You do not say, this is bad. You do not say, I must be positive. You say something that creates separation. Something like, why are you speaking? Who authorized this conclusion? Why are you cast down? This is not poetic. It is surgical. Because the moment you address the soul, the spiral breaks character. It hesitates. For the first time, the mood is not you. It is something happening within you. And that distinction is everything. At first it feels awkward. You will feel resistance, embarrassment, even fear. Because the old dialogue will protest. It will say, this is fake. It will say, you're lying to yourself. It will say, this doesn't change reality. But remember the law. The subconscious does not care about commentary. It responds to who is speaking with authority. And authority is not proven in a moment. It is proven through return. You interrupt again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Not because the feeling vanished, but because you refuse to let it speak unchallenged. This is the discipline no one glamorizes. Because it does not feel inspiring. It feels deliberate, dry, almost boring. But repetition built the prison, and repetition opens the door. You are not trying to feel better. You are training the field to recognize a new hierarchy. You are teaching the soul that it is not the narrator. It is the listener. And the listener learns quickly when the signal is consistent. This is why the method works even when emotion lags behind. Because emotion follows expectation. And expectation follows language. You are not chasing relief. You are installing a new default. And here is the strange, quiet relief that begins to whisper, not yet a feeling, but a possibility. The heaviness does not disappear immediately. But it no longer owns the room. It has been questioned. And nothing questioned ever feels as absolute again, because the next stage is not technique, it is becoming. At first, nothing changes on the outside. That is what makes this stage so unsettling. You still wake up tired. The same obligations wait. The same memories knock. The same sensations ripple through the body. And the old voice is quick to point this out. "See," it says, "nothing happened. You're still here." But something subtle has already shifted, so subtle that it hides in plain sight. You did not merge, you did not drown, you did not automatically agree. For the first time, the feeling arrived and met a boundary, a quiet one, an internal one, not resistance, not denial, authority. You addressed the soul instead of collapsing into it. And now the method reveals its true power. It is not about eliminating negative inner speech. It is about ending its monopoly, because the old dialogue thrived on exclusivity. It spoke because no one interrupted it. It ruled because no one questioned it. It sounded like truth because it was alone. But now there is another voice in the room. Not louder, not emotional, steady. The voice that asks instead of assumes. The voice that commands instead of narrates. The voice that refuses to let despair speak unchecked. And here is the part that almost no one tells you. The subconscious does not need the new voice to be eloquent. It needs it to be present. Again, and again, and again. You may speak clumsily at first. You may forget to interrupt. You may fall back into old narration for hours or days. This is not failure. This is the residue of repetition unwinding. Do not correct yourself with shame. Shame is just the old voice wearing a moral mask. Instead, return. Every return matters more than perfection. Each time you interrupt, you weaken the illusion that the old dialogue is automatic. It was never automatic. It was practiced. And now, so is this. There will be moments, unexpected ones, when you catch the spiral mid-sentence. When the phrase, "this always happens," dies halfway through. When heaviness pauses, confused. When the body waits for instruction and doesn't receive the old one. Those moments are quiet. They don't announce themselves, but they are seismic. Because in those moments, the subconscious is recalibrating. Not because you felt powerful, but because you spoke consistently. And slowly, so slowly you almost miss it, something begins to loosen. The heaviness still visits, but it doesn't settle as deeply. The fatigue still arrives, but it doesn't define the day. The shadow still exists, but it no longer owns the narrative. You are not fixing yourself. You are governing, and governance is not emotional. It is structural. You are installing a new order, one interruption at a time. And yet, something remains unresolved. Because once you begin speaking with authority, you can never go back to innocence. You can no longer pretend the voice is harmless. You can no longer hide behind automation, which leads to a new tension, one that burns hotter than despair ever did. Responsibility. Not blame, responsibility, because now you know the law listens, and you are speaking. Because what follows is not a method, it is an identity rupture. There is a moment, quiet, irreversible, when you realize you can no longer say, "This just happens to me," not because life suddenly became gentle, not because emotions stopped rising, but because something inside you stood up. And once it stands, it does not sit back down. This is where identity fractures, not in a dramatic reinvention, not in a confident declaration, but in a subtle refusal. You refuse to collapse into every mood. You refuse to let every thought speak with equal authority. You refuse to confuse sensation with sovereignty. Before this shift, identity was porous. Moods passed through and left furniture behind. Thoughts entered and rearranged the room. Fatigue spoke and you listened as if it were a verdict. You didn't know you were surrendering. You thought you were being honest. But now there is a line, and that line burns. Because you are no longer merely the one who feels. You are the one who addresses. This is not empowerment as culture sells it. It is not confidence. It is not self-esteem. It is governance. And governance is lonely at first. Because when you stop merging with the inner weather, you lose a familiar intimacy with suffering. There is grief in that. Strange, isn't it? You mourn the voice that explained you to yourself. You mourn the story that made sense of your exhaustion. You mourn the identity built around endurance, because endurance was familiar. But something else begins to form in the space it leaves behind. A steadiness that does not ask permission. A presence that does not rush to explain itself. A voice that does not panic when heaviness arrives. You become the one who can say, "I see you. I hear you." You do not decide. Not angrily. Not forcefully. Firmly. This is where inner fire replaces inner noise, not passion, authority. You stop asking, "Why do I feel this way?" And you start asking, "Why is this voice speaking unchecked?" That question alone changes posture. Your spine straightens internally. You begin to sense the difference between experience and identity. The sadness is real, but it is not you. The fatigue is present, but it is not you. The shadow exists, but it does not speak for the whole. This is where power enters, not as control, but as clarity. You no longer fight thoughts, you outrank them. And with that ranking comes a new kind of tension. Because once you recognize yourself as the governor, you can no longer pretend ignorance. You feel the weight of every sentence you allow. Every inner conclusion now matters. Every repeated phrase carries consequence. And this awareness is not comforting, it is sharp. You catch yourself mid-thought and feel the burn of choice. Will I let this sentence finish? Will I repeat it? Will I authorize it? This is where many long for the old numbness. Because numbness didn't demand presence. But presence is now unavoidable. You are no longer a victim of moods, but you are also no longer free to be careless. And something else begins to emerge, something dangerous and alive: respect. You begin to respect your own inner word. You stop throwing language around casually. You stop narrating collapse for entertainment. You stop rehearsing despair for familiarity. Because you have seen the law at work. And laws do not negotiate. They respond. This identity is not resolved. It is not peaceful, it is charged. Because every day now holds a question you cannot escape. Who is speaking today? And you know, deep in your bones, that the soul is still listening. Because the final state is not closure. It is awareness held open. There is no ending to this. That is the final unsettling truth. The law does not conclude. It does not rest. It does not wait for readiness. It listens. Right now. Even as you sit with this awareness, the inner world is alive with movement. Sensations rise, thoughts brush past. Old phrases knock softly, pretending nothing has changed. And perhaps nothing has changed yet. Not externally, not visibly, not in a way you could prove. But something has been exposed, and exposure is irreversible. You now know that the inner dialogue is not random, that the voice is not innocent, that repetition is not harmless. You know the soul is listening, which means every quiet sentence carries weight. This is not meant to make you anxious, it is meant to make you awake. Because awareness does not demand perfection, it demands presence. You will still slip into old narration. You will still forget to interrupt. You will still wake up some mornings already heavy, but you will hear it now. The tone, the assumption, the familiar phrasing, and hearing is enough to change everything, eventually. The shadow does not vanish when named. It loses authority. Mystery remains. Not the mystery of why this works, but the mystery of what happens next when you speak differently long enough, because the next sentence has not been spoken yet. The field is open, the soul is attentive, the law is active, and somewhere inside you right now a pause lingers, a breath before language, a moment before repetition resumes. This is where choice hides, not loud, not dramatic, barely visible. And the question is not whether the dialogue will continue, it will. The only question, quiet, pressing, alive, is this: who will speak next?